The 2024 Olympics in Paris are almost here, and we are talking about those wrestlers getting in at the last possible minute. Last chance qualifiers. Greg Pickel has been following those, and he has been reporting on that. So all of the former Penn State Nittany Lions in contention for the Olympics. We're going to be discussing Spencer Lee, Zain Retherford, and of course what's going on with the program. David Taylor going to Oklahoma State. That's all on tap on the Penn State Wrestling Show. Welcome to the show. If you're watching this, please subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. We're going to be giving you this information and keeping you up to date with what's going on with Penn State wrestling all year long. So, Greg, welcome to the show. Thank you for your time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, T. Frank. The Olympics will be here before we know it, and that means football season is right around the corner. And then as soon as football season starts, it feels like wrestling season starts. So a lot to talk about, a lot to get to, and plenty happening in the months ahead.
Yeah, August is going to be a little bit busy. It's going to extend that window of things happening into the summer with, of course, Penn State football training camp and the first games on the doorstep. So let's enjoy the summer while we have it. Let's enjoy the run-up to the Olympics. So tell me about Spencer Lee and Zain Retherford and what happened over this past weekend.
Yeah, so just to catch everybody up, because it is a little bit confusing to follow, the U.S. team trials were held at the Bryce Jordan Center back in April. We've, of course, covered that here on the Blue White Illustrated Penn State Wrestling Show. But not everyone who won their weight at that event was already automatically going to the Olympics. So of the 6 Olympic weights, Kyle Dake, Aaron Brooks, Kyle Snyder, they're all Nittany Lion Wrestling Club members, and Mason Paris, who is the heavyweight representative and a Michigan alum, they all were qualified for the Olympics already. But the U.S. did not previously qualify 57 kilograms and 65 kilograms for the Olympics, which basically means the previous U.S. national team spot in the lineup, whoever had that spot before did not win a tournament that qualified the U.S. for the Olympics at those weights. So the U.S. had to send a representative at 57 kilograms and at 65 kilograms to the last chance qualifier in Istanbul, Turkey, and any other country that wasn't qualified at any weight had a chance to go there as well. You had to finish in the top 3. Each country sent one representative that wasn't qualified. You had to finish in the top 3 to punch your ticket to Paris, and the U.S. will now have all 6 weights represented. Spencer Lee, the Iowa alum, ran through the 57-kilogram bracket in really impressive fashion and just took it by storm. Zain Retherford, the Penn State alum, of course, and tremendously accomplished wrestler, took a little bit of a different path. He lost to Ochor, who was a very highly regarded wrestler and was the eventual winner of the 65-kilogram bracket. But what him winning that bracket meant was that Zain Retherford got pulled back into the third-place tournament. It's called repechage in international freestyle wrestling. And
that's
basically,
a fun word. I thought that was a typo on the rundown.
No, it is not. We call it the consolation bracket here. But
yes.
So at any rate, he had to win 4 matches to make it to the Olympics. And he did that on Sunday, the second day of the tournament, won pretty handily his way through that bracket, and he's on the way to Paris. So the Olympics rather will feature 6 U.S. competitors in men's freestyle. 4 of them are Nittany Lion Wrestling Club members, 2 of them Penn State alums. So, I think the biggest takeaway, T. Frank, it just goes to show what these Penn State wrestling guys can accomplish after their careers are over. It's why the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club has been so successful. Zain Retherford, not all that long ago, was ready to hang up his shoes and move on to the next stage of life. And he decided to give it one more go. And Penn State Wrestling, USA Wrestling, and of course he and his family are very happy he chose to do so because now he will be heading to the Olympics here in 2024.
Yeah, and the number of paths forward, I think, with a lot of wrestlers blazing trails into the UFC. I know Bo Nickel's a big name in that. And, of course, in the Olympics, despite, not having it's not just going to the WWE or anything like that where you have very limited options at the next level. Now it seems like there are more and more opportunities for wrestlers to continue to be in the sport or in a some sort of combat sport. Any other Olympic news, any other things that we should be looking out for in terms of what's next, or is it just the Olympics are next at this point?
Yeah, it'll just be the Olympics next at this point. So these guys will train throughout the rest of May, June, and July, and then they'll head to Paris. I'm assuming the first week of August to get ready for that competition. I don't have the dates in front of me, but it doesn't start exactly when the Olympics starts. It's one of the events that starts a little bit later in the Olympic weeks. So we'll keep you posted on that. But T-Frank, one thing I did want to get to as we move out of the Olympics and into some other things is, I believe last week's show, Greg Kirkfleet announced his return to Penn State. I forgot to put this on the rundown, but we did cover it briefly. He's coming back to Penn State, the defending 285-pound NCAA champion. Simple announcement to say he's coming back. As we told you last week, that was expected all along, but it's now official. So that means Penn State, the three guys who had decisions to make, Bo Bartlett at 141 pounds, Carter Starace at whatever weight he decides to wrestle at, whether it's his four-time NCAA champion 174-pound weight or something bigger, and now Greg Kirkfleet will be back. So we're going to get into this a little bit later in the show, but we're starting an off-season outlook weight-by-weight breakdown at Blue White Illustrated, and some of the weights have more questions than others, but obviously when you're getting three NCAA finalists back that could have left, and two of them, of course, being defending NCAA champions, the lineup is looking pretty good for Penn State in 2024-2025.
It certainly feels a lot better than where we were sitting maybe a month ago when you had a bunch of question marks. And the news has been, I think, mostly good on that side. It is interesting, kind of the reaction to David Taylor. And I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to put in there into that conversation before we move on to David Taylor. But the idea that there is now, as we talked about, another avenue for Penn State wrestler types to go out and find a different program to wrestle for. It seems like there's been a mixed reaction of, like, for the first time in a decade, there is a challenger. Whether or not fans dismiss that or are afraid of that, I think is interesting, the reaction to that. But just generally, let's talk about the fallout of David Taylor going to Oklahoma State. What have you seen, and what were your observations of the process of him going to Oklahoma State?
Yeah, so his introductory press conference was late last week. I think it was Friday. And so he is on the ground, rocking and rolling in Stillwater. And he took two members of the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club Penn State program with him. Jimmy Kennedy, who was his brother-in-law, we talked about this last week, was very likely to join his Oklahoma State staff as an assistant coach. He's going to be the associate head coach, so that's done. And then Thomas Gilman is going from the NLWC to Oklahoma State to be an assistant coach on David Taylor's staff. Obviously, those are two guys who helped Penn State with lightweights and middleweights in the room. You know, we always talk about how there's a lot of cross-pollination between the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club and Penn State Wrestling, and that is true. So when you start, looking at possible replacements, I think you obviously start the bidding there with someone or, someone who is in a lower to middleweight that can wrestle with the 125 through 157 pound guys in the Penn State college program. But as for Taylor himself, he made pretty clear that he thought his competition career was definitely going to end after this Olympic cycle, whether that was at the Olympic team trials or at the Olympics. He, of course, did not know before he lost to Aaron Brooks at the team trials. And that set off this crazy... I shouldn't put an hour limit on it, but it was like a 96-hour process, basically, that started with a phone call from the Oklahoma State athletic director, ended with David Taylor taking his first head coaching job at the collegiate level. So, he was very complimentary and respectful to Penn State in his opening news conference at Oklahoma State, as you could probably expect. Thanked a lot of people and things like that. So we'll just see how this goes from here. Obviously, they have a good program there. They're going to probably, look to the portal to fill some holes, and they got good recruits coming in, good guys on the roster. So like we talked about last week, I mean, this may not be a year one situation where they immediately challenge for the top spot in the NCAA team race. But certainly, I think when you look at him, his staff, and then what they're going to be able to do recruiting-wise there, it probably won't be long before they're having, at least in those conversations. But for Penn State's at the top of that mountain, and somebody has to get within a couple rungs of them before we even start. Some of the reaction to me, you spoke about it a moment ago, but it was almost like this immediately ends Penn State's dynasty run, and I just don't think that's the case. And will it happen one day? Sure, it's possible, but
is that kind of a not a wishful thinking by the sport at large, but a wishful thinking that there would be serious competition to create a little more drama, it seems. And I it's always hard to talk about this, Greg, because you don't want to take what they've done for granted or as expected, but at the same time, it's hard not to. So I guess how do you view kind of that reaction from the sport at large?
I think the sport at large will take anything that makes day 3 of the NCAA championship not just a Penn State party, and you can't blame them for that. Obviously, Penn State fans love that fact, but
yeah,
when you're going into the semifinals on Friday night and the team race isn't clinched, but it's it is except for math. There's not a whole lot of drama then on Saturday outside of the individual bouts, of course, which are always fun to watch, and of course have plenty of Penn State flavor most years. So yeah, I think the sport at large is excited, and I don't blame it for being excited. I mean, anything that provides a little bit more spice at the national tournament during the regular season, things like that, certainly I think is good for the sport of college wrestling as it continues to grow and become more mainstream, I guess you could say, with being on ESPN, obviously the Big Ten Network, things like that. So the more storylines, the better. And then however you want to cash them or however you want to look at them, the more the better in my mind. And obviously, when you have a legend of the sport in David Taylor taking over one of the most storied programs in college wrestling, you're going to have some things to talk about. So certainly Penn State fans will be keeping a close eye on that. But yeah, I think things at this point, a week, 2 weeks into it, whatever we are, going pretty much as expected. And we'll see if there's any more changes on that front down the road.
So let's get into our offseason outlook, looking at the lineup for 24-25, and I've got a couple questions kind of to thread in here, but where do you want to start with that particular preview of next season?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Obviously, like we just talked about, whoever Penn State hires for the open assistant coach job is probably going to be working with your 125-pound, 133-pound guys. And Penn State's going to have some decisions to make there. Braden Davis went to the U20 U.S. Open a couple weeks ago, wrestled up at 131 pounds. I don't have the kilogram conversion in front of me, and I think most people probably appreciate that anyway. So, but that was another signal that, the incumbent 125-pound wrestler for Penn State may be getting ready to move up and challenge for 133. And what does that look like? Is it a redshirt year, and then he takes on Aaron Nagao for that spot? Does he challenge Aaron Nagao for it this year? Time will tell on that front, but I think we're getting, closer and closer to the reality that Braden Davis may not be at 125 next year, and there's been plenty of smoke around that. There's starting to become a little bit of smoldering fire. Certainly a long way to go. We'll see what he does at the team trials later this year and where he might go, at other freestyle events throughout the summer. But if it's not him, you look at the list of returners, T. Frank, and it's guys who battled Braden Davis for the spot last year and didn't win out. That's obviously Robbie Howard is a guy who we've talked about here a lot on the show, more so in like October and November than recently. But the 2021 NCAA qualifier, who has struggled with being healthy enough to stay on the mat over the last couple of seasons, it was thought that he was going to come back and finally take the spot back this year, and that did not end up being the case, obviously. So, he will be back in the mix, presumably. You have Marco Vespa back, Gary Steen back. Those guys at least have eligibility to come back. And you bring in Luke Lilledahl, one of the most accomplished prep wrestlers out there, and won a match at the Olympic team trials as a high school senior. So if you're not going with Braden Davis at 125, you got to start the bidding at Luke Lilledahl as the favorite to take that job for Penn State, which would make it 2 years in a row a freshman starts in that weight class. So that's going to be the question throughout the summer at 125. If it's not Braden Davis, who is it? And Luke Lilledahl is the place to start.
I guess the other question, with kind of going back to David Taylor and the Oklahoma State opportunities, this has been such a deep room for Penn State wrestling. When guys compete and don't make the starting lineup, I know that the transfer portal window is closed, but do you foresee an opportunity, or do you think the wrestlers that they've recruited would then leave? And I guess, is there an etiquette here of not actively recruiting guys from the Penn State wrestling room for David Taylor? That's I think like a long-term projection, something we're not going to talk about really until some of these things happen. And honestly, I apologize, I don't know when the next transfer portal window for wrestling opens, but it is, I guess, part of the threat of this conversation is like bleeding the depth of the deepest team in wrestling. So how do these competitions work themselves out, in your opinion, knowing that is now a new element in the room?
Yeah, there's no question about it. So, anyone who's been following Penn State wrestling's lineup decision-making process for a long time knows that Cael Sanderson lets these things play out as long as possible. T. Frank, I think you went to like 5 or 6 press conferences in a row where the 125-pound starting spot, and these were broken up over, a few weeks, a month, maybe 2. So they let these things play out, and that is to your benefit in general to make sure you're making the right decision for when Big Ten season gets here, and obviously starting to ramp up for the postseason. But it also helps. You would assume anyway, it would help with, any guy saying, okay, well, I'm not the guy, so I'm just going to hit the portal now and move on. And Penn State has obviously, as we've talked about, been tremendously successful when it comes to not losing guys to the portal unless they're in a position where they have 1 year left and they don't have a clear path to a starting spot. Terrell Barraclaw, an example, as we talk on May 15, hasn't picked a school yet, but left via the portal, the only Penn State wrestler to do so, because he didn't have a clear spot to get on the mat and is certainly capable enough at somewhere that isn't Penn State. So a couple other examples in the past, Seth Neville's being one, Michael Beard the other, but that is going to be the fascinating part of this now is Penn State has been so good at not losing its depth to the portal, despite guys being capable of wrestling elsewhere. It's never been a situation, though, where the entire room knows the head coach at one of the other, storied, highly funded, highly resourced programs in the country. And they all know him. That's never been a problem before. So that is going to be one of the fascinating wrinkles to the next portal cycle, which is, of course, way down the road. But, there's no question that that's going to be something to watch closely once lineup decisions are made and things like that. And, will it greatly impact Penn State next year and moving forward? I'm not willing to say that yet. Is it something you got to be aware of and keep as a talking point? There's no question, because it is certainly a part of the wrinkle of this whole thing for sure.
The Penn State Wrestling Show here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, bluewhiteillustrated.com. Great time to remind you, subscribe to bluewhiteillustrated.com. You get 2 months for $1 when you use the promo code PSU1 because you're getting our wrestling content from Greg. You're checking out the show here. We know that you're a Penn State fanatic, whether you're just a wrestling fan, wrestling and football, wrestling, basketball, football, all of it. We want you to be a part of the team. So join. You get an extra month to try out the show, the site, 2 months for $1 with the promo code PSU1. Greg, thanks so much for your time today. That's it for the Penn State Wrestling Show. We'll be back with more information as we go throughout the summer and head into the Olympics in August.